Hello and welcome to DAG in Exchange Server 2016. DAG stands for Database Availability Group. So before we configure DAG, I just want you to understand some important points that we have for the DAG. So DAG is a mailbox role, which is like high availability role. So you configure DAG whenever you want to have like high availability. For example, you have one exchange here, both of them are on the same Active Directory domain. You got like mailbox database in here and exactly in here, which is replicating in here. So if one of the mailboxes mailboxes server goes down, if you have configured DAG, users will still be able to access their emails because the DAG is configured in here. So that is the concept of DAG. So DAG is very important for all organization who got like important emails where they never want to have a downtime. So in earlier days when there was no DAG, there was like they were configuring clustering, like they were using Windows clustering features in order to configure all those failover features, high availability features. But these days, like in Exchange Server 2016, we got DAG. In 2013 and 10, we had DAG. So DAG is something that really made our life easier. You can simply configure it, and there are some important points that you have to understand when configuring DAG. So Exchange DAG don't require shared storage. This is one thing that you need to understand. All mailboxes should be on the same AD domain. So, for example, you have Active Directory domain, which is like ilmjotech.local, and then you have another domain which is like global.com. So these are like in two different forests. You cannot configure DAG between them. It is not supported. They should be on the same domain, on the same AD domain to configure DAG. So when configuring DAG for them, they should be on the same AD domain, ilmjo.com, ilmjo.com. So make sure they are on the same AD domain. This is the another one of the requirements for your DAG in Exchange Server 2016. So one other thing is you can create copies, but are limited to 16 copies of each database. So whenever you configure DAG, what you can do is you can create up to 16 copies of those each database, and you cannot create a database copy on server that has already an active or passive copy of that database. So make sure that whenever you are creating a database copy, the server make sure that the server is already not already have got no active or passive copy of the database, and the limit is up to 16 copies. So the other thing is that the mailbox servers cannot be domain controllers. So if this is your Active Directory domain, this is your Active Directory domain, and you got like Exchange server installed, and now your company is asking you to configure DAG, since they are domain controllers, it is not possible. You cannot configure DAG if you have installed it in a domain controller. So make sure you install them on a separate server. So when a DAG is set up, a Windows failover cluster is set up. You cannot use cluster for any other services that is not supported. So you cannot use cluster for any other services. So if once you create DAG, what are you doing is you're configuring a clustering, and then that clustering is something that you cannot use for any other services. So for example, this is your exchange, this is your exchange. You configure DAG, it is going to configure a cluster in these two servers. And if you are trying to configure another type of cluster for another type of services, For example, for file server services, it is not going to support it. So make sure that you do not configure any other cluster services once you configure DAG. So just one cluster with DAG. You cannot configure more than that. So the other thing is that whenever you got DAG, data center activation coordination DAC mode prevents a split brain scenario where the same database is active in both data centers, and you then can divergence then get the divergence of data where changes are made to both database but not replicated across. So DAC is not enabled by default but should be enabled for all DACs. Uh, we will enable DAC in our scenario. So what DAC is? Data center activation, where it prevents a split brain scenario, where like you got both databases as active, and then it just like the data is copied in here, like any changes is made, and then it is already in there but it is not replicated. And when the data is not replicated and they have like two different datas, like one database got exchange database got for example separate or different collection of data, and then another database got different collection of data, then this can be problem when they are not replicated. So DAC prevents all those things. So the networking requirement for DAG is you should at least use 1 GB connection, but 10 GB is preferable. And then you can configure DAG with a single network, which will be used for MAPI and replication, or you can set up two separate network, one for MAPI and one for replication. So if you have like more than one network adapters, it is always best practice to use one for MAPI and one for replication. So you can use this, um, and it will be faster. If you're using separate MAPI and replication networks, a MAPI network failure will cause a server failover. If the replication network fails, then the MAPI network will be used for replication, even if the replication enabled property on the network is set to false. So these are the important things that we need to know about networking requirements. So each DAG member requires the same number of networks and network adapter. This thing that you need to know. So each DAG member requires the same number of networks and network adapter. And then each DAG member must only have one MAPI network, which needs to have access to other Exchange Server DNS and Active Directory. So when you have MAPI, it is used to access DNS and Active Directory information. So the replication network adapter for each server must be able to communicate with each other server's replication network so that they can replicate properly. They should be able to communicate with each other. So automatic private IP addressing, a PIPA, which is like whenever you do not have any DHCP server, you just set your network adapter to obtain IP address automatically, and then it obtains it from a PIPA, or automatic private IP addressing, which is 169 something, I guess. And then that is not supported. So a PIPA address is not supported. Make sure if you are using DHCP, always make sure that you have got DHCP server available, or static IP is always the best. So quorum and witness server requirement. This is another thing. You must always have an odd number of voters in a cluster. If you have an even number of mailbox servers in DAG, the DAG will use a node and file share majority quorum model, where it will just use a file share witness which is created on a witness server during the DAG setup. So during the DAG setup, it is going to just create a witness server. If you have odd number of mailbox servers in DAG, then the DAG will use the node majority quorum model, and the file share witness will not be used. So this is two different things when you use how you are using creating using the odd numbers, the numbers of mailboxes. So the witness server can be any server in the domain running 2003 or later. So any server that is running server 2003 or later can be your witness server. Uh, but not a DAG member, because you will lose two votes if that member goes down, and ideally not a domain controller, as this means that the exchange trusted subsite has more permission than it requires, which is not best practice. So you cannot use Exchange DAG members to configure your witness server. So make sure that you use a server that is like running on operating system 2003 or later. The DHE will create a file share on the witness server and will use this as a voter in case you have an even number of mailbox servers. So this is the requirements for the DAG that you have to understand before we just go ahead and configure database availability groups. So I hope you have learned something, and I'll see you on next video where we will configure DAG in real life.